Okay, the light sucks right now, or maybe I should say the shadow sucks. But in a few hours, the opposite's going to be true. The light's going to come, and that's when I'm going to put my session. But I'm actually going to extend this session into the post-sunset time. It's our job not to be sterile, but to create feeling, to look at a scene, its good points, its bad points, our streets, our models, our couples, even if the wind's blowing and the dust is everywhere. What I want to do on tonight's session is get a really wide range of images from the safe shots that are magical and we know are going to be good, and then get into some of the other stuff. And in fact, as I promised you guys, I was going to make a video on Pictorialist 1.1, the new update. But I wanted to make this video about just understanding how to create really good sessions in general. If you can get in that zone, things start to come together. Those magic hour shots usually work out great. But what about the other ones? Being able to detach ourselves from the perfect edit is huge. And that's something I've been learning in studying pictorialism. And yes, I want resolution. Yes, I want sharpness. Yes, I want detail. But that's not my obsession. What I really want to do is to be able to detach from that in favor of feeling. So the session went great. I went really late until it was basically dark and just kept pushing. And stick around until the end of the video because I'm going to give you some tips on dealing with that ultra low light when you don't have that magic golden glow like I talked about on last week's video. I've sorted the favorites and picked out some so we can work with the editing. You can kind of see the theme, right? Starting out with the afternoon light, going into the evening light, into the sunset light, and then into the darkness. The more you visualize here in camera, the better you're going to get as an output. The more you're going to slow down, take less photos. Now, most of these I've just done a basic film list, like a 400H on, so they have a nice good process, and then I'll take the best ones. What I do want to point out here, though, even though I'm not making you watch me sort through down to all the 5 stars, it's really important as professionals that we're decisive and we know what we're creating. If I do a session and there's just so many good ones and I'm like, oh, they're all amazing, and I'm rating everything 5 stars, and then I go back and there's like 20 of basically the same pose, it's my job to reduce that to maybe 1 or 2 or 3 from that pose and then the next pose, etc. It's not the client's job to cull images for us. And that impression, that feeling, that confidence that we project is really important, not only to building our businesses, but to giving our clients confidence in us. When your model, when your client has confidence in what you're doing, they're going to trust you and they're going to let you take the lead and be really creative. I've set aside kind of some of my favorites, different moods, different themes from different lighting situations throughout this session as we changed outfits and moved around town and things like that. And that light got darker and darker. The light went really fast, faster than I want. What's new with magic hour, right? So always go out a little earlier than you need to, even though those early shots will oftentimes be in the less than ideal light. If you have a location that's got a lot of tree cover or something like that, do that first. And if you have an open space like a field or a lake or something where that last light of day is still going to be hitting, do that last. I want crisp, clear images, but I'm not afraid to have a little motion. I'm not afraid to lower shutter speeds, things like that. Notice here how some of these, I'm going around with a strobe, and you'll see in my behind the scenes video, I was actually just using an AD200. Here's a good example here of strobe versus no strobe. These are both nice photos. On this one here, I had a strobe coming clipped into the tree from the right. And so we get a lot more dynamic dimension. Now, I think if I put a secondary small flash behind to get a little hair light, it would have been good as well, but my light was going really fast. I'm a little hot here on the belly and chest area, and I'm gonna have to burn that down a little bit. Whereas in the all natural light version, everything's kind of even and nice, and it's a very nice photo, but when you add a strobe, it adds that kind of dynamic feel. The main thing is feeling. That's what I keep coming back to as we study shadows, as we study pictorialism, as we study technique. Our photos need to have feeling one way or the other. And if you're not feeling it, change something up. This is why a lot of times on collaboration sessions where I'm not under a specific rule of I have to make this or I have to make that, they're my favorites because I can just practice. I can practice posing with the model. I can practice lights. I can take a small light. I don't need to bring a crew. But the thing is, I could take a big 60-inch softbox in my AD600 and then have it, weighted down and all this so it doesn't blow away. But a lot of times just a little strobe bouncing off something, or a little AD200 bare bulb but close to the subject and controlled, a little bit of fill light, those actually give me a lot of creative control. Let me just reset this. I did a Filmus preset, I did an Elegance preset to do a little smooth skin smoothing, things like that. But everything was just in Lightroom. And you could do the same in Capture One. I will probably still take this to a layer-based edit like Photoshop, but let's get into something a little more moody. In fact, this goes into what I alluded to with the new Pictorialist 1.1 amp. Now I'm going to do something a little more contrasty, like a nature on this, for example, and I'm going to push my exposure just a little bit, but I'm not going to fall into this trap of we always have to push up skin tones into zone 6, zone 7. It's okay to have shadow. I'm going to use Pictorialist here. This is the 1.1 update. If you don't use Pictorialist, just insert whatever your way of doing advanced edits, stacking layers, because when you do advanced edits, you mix blending modes, you mix blurs, you mix tonality, you mix texture. This is how you get the really award-winning images. So that's why I make actions and tools to do this. And in fact, in the 1.1 update, I've also done various updates, but I've done a lot of refinements as well, particularly on the CS6 version of the actions for those that don't want to use subscription. But notice here, I'm going to run the Seim effect. This was in the original version, but you'll see this new Seim Sunglow. These are combo mixes. So these are doing these really advanced stacks of layers and basically combining all kinds of different other actions that fit with whatever theme that we're doing, whether it's the David Hamilton look, a Stieglitz look, an Orton look, the Seim look, right? And so we can go through here. Now, this is kind of gritty. You can see there's a lot of texture. It's kind of cool for this moody feel, but I'm actually going to do the new Seim Sunglow. The Seim look is a little bit more gritty, a little bit more street, a little bit more artistic-y. Is that even a word? I don't think so. I don't think so. The Sunglow mode is a little warmer, a little subtler on the texture, and a little more portrait-based. And this is the beauty with using actions and building everything nice and organized. If you come in and say, hey, I want a little less texture, just go to the tarnish surface group in here and turn it on or off, turn it up or down, etc. And you can control how much texture you're getting. I can do the same with the mist layers, which are affecting mistiness and blur. I can go to the shadow layers. So I can turn things up or down, and I can, of course, click on a curve layer, for example, and manually edit it as well. But notice what's happening here. We're getting this mood that we didn't have in Lightroom. In this one, we actually have pretty good light. And I'm still going to go into Photoshop. Now look here, we have a Lightroom process. I'm actually going to go straight into Photoshop. And in this case today, I'm still going to just be using Pictorialist. That's what I'm using on the action side today. But sometimes I use Lumist, I use Alchemist, I use different toolkits, right? So if I run the Seim mix of Pictorialist, I'm going to get a little bit more of an intense, gritty kind of look that actually works really good here. It's soft color, it's fitting in with the light kind of bouncing off the sombrero and the fabric flowing and all this. Now I'm going to snapshot that. This is what I'll often do when editing in Photoshop, is take a snapshot. And I'm going to run the Sunglow remix. Remember, when you're using Pictorialist, always run the primary green effect first, and then the ones below it are remixes. This also looks really good. Now, I could then go again into these curve layers like the super shadow, the darker mood layer, and I could adjust things to control kind of the matte feeling of the shadows and how much lift I want. Notice how I went from a raw looking image that was nice, but just a little plain, and then I went to an edit where it feels like we're intentional. It feels like we have a plan, we knew what we were doing, and that's because we did. This one, we're getting really dark, right? I've put a preset, I've lightened it up a little bit, I've played with the curves in Lightroom. Let's look at our raw file. Here is the raw file. You can see it's really dark. By this point, I was pushing up to ISO 6400. You start getting really strange color when you get this dark of images. In fact, as I was shooting this and it got dark, I was like, we're going to be probably processing these ones as black and white. But it's not a rule. I keep coming back to this and the Seim Sunglow mix because this is one of the big updates in 1.1. This Sunglow mix is actually a very powerful combination of all the actions. Kind of combines a little bit of grittiness with a little bit of Hamilton type look, and you can really mix it up. Now the subtle light that's left from the sky over to our left is coming in. I did some of these with strobes. It wasn't that I couldn't put a strobe here, but I actually wanted some of these to be that really dark, moody shadow. I wanted the feeling of shadow. I wanted the feeling of it's after dark, of the lights gone. Not every photo needs to be sterile and perfect, is what I'm getting at with this session. I take something that was kind of a harsh raw file that lacked in color nuance. And even without going to black and white, in Pictorialist, I have something that has a mood. What I'm getting at is that it's important to step outside the norms of a Rembrandt light, the norms of put a strobe, put a hair light. Use and feel the scene around you. This is why I love going outside to shoot, because everything's changing so fast and you have to be really on your toes. And most people go out and do this and they just shoot the same every time. This is why I think it's really important that we do sessions that aren't always demanding, that aren't always for a specific project, and that we're just going out and practicing and learning. I'm going to give you those low light tips, I promise. But look at this kind of overview of these images. You can see how we've run the gamut from golden sunlight to strobe to shadowy to fabrics, and working our way into this darkness where there's just no timidness. We can have great equipment and great lights and we should know how to use them, but if we're not feeling, if we're not seeing, if we're not experimenting, if we're not gauging, like, you know, what is this model like? What is my subject like? What are the streets like today? What's the mood that I feel in this landscape? We want to convey the soul of a thing. And you can see that some of these have Hamilton edits, and some of these have Coburn edits, and some of these have these dark mixes that I've put on. That low light of that Pictorialist feel that works amazing in honestly pretty much any portrait scenario. You can apply whatever editing style you want to this, but remember not to chintz out on your editing. Take those best images and work with them, and know your tools and have your actions and your tools in place and put them to work. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to give you a few tips on the low light front, because people get intimidated by this. Notice how this one looks different because I've done the extra level of editing in Photoshop on it, but even the raw versions just done with some tweaks and some black and white presets, they actually look really good. Now, the key here is that I wasn't afraid to push the ISO 3200, 6400, even on the Fuji, because grain isn't bad. It actually adds to this natural ambience. I wasn't afraid to turn my shutter speed down a bit. Yes, you're going to get some blurs. You're going to get some interesting mixes. You're going to get a hit rate that's less when you turn that shutter speed down. So you probably don't want to do your whole session with your critical photos. Do less pressing the shutter and taking hundreds of photos, and take the time to stop, look at the light, look at the shadow, look your model in the eyes and see how she's responding to the mood. Talk to the family or the senior portrait or the bridal couple you're working with, and just relax. As you're doing that, take the time to look down at your camera and say, oh, I'm at ISO X. I'm at shutter speed 250. What happens if I do shutter speed 60? What happens if I do shutter speed 30? Don't be afraid to change that setting. With low light, you have to get a little creative. Yes, you can bring strobes in, and I did that on some of these, but I didn't like them as well because they felt more staged. So I actually said, screw it. I don't care if there's noise. In fact, a lot of times in film presets and Pictorialist, I'm adding a little bit of grain in because it unifies that kind of organic texture. It gets rid of that digital harshness, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with grain and feeling and mood and making it feel like it came off a high ISO film on a 35mm camera. You can see this one does actually have a strobe in the back, and there's a hair light coming in, and it gives it a little bit of mood as well. So don't be afraid to use mixed lighting, right? Don't just say, oh, I'm a natural light photographer because you're lazy. Bring your strobe and use it, but don't feel like every photo has to be perfect. And this, I think, is my biggest tip for low light. Don't be afraid, number one, to crank up the ISO. Don't be afraid, number two, to open it up wide open and lower the shutter speed, even if some of your shots come out a little bit blurry. Number three, don't be afraid of the fact that it's darker. Turn your subjects, move yourself in a street scene. Look for where the light is kind of glowing through, even if it's really low. You're gonna get some really creative stuff. And it may not all come out amazing, but the ones that do, you're going to be really proud of. Mayumi did a great job on this session, but understand that this was not an experienced model. This was just a hands-on workshop collaboration session where we went out and we experimented and we tried things, and by exuding confidence, by being willing to experiment, I made the model comfortable, and we were able to try a lot of different variety and a lot of different creativity. And the result is I get great photos and she gets great photos. And why was it so easy? Because of that law of detachment. I wasn't obsessing. I wasn't like, oh no, it has to be exactly like this because it's for the magazine, right? There's times when you have to do that, but it's important to practice in those detached sessions. And when I say detached, I don't mean indifferent. I mean, you're not stressing about it. You're not worrying about it. You know you're going to try things. You know they're going to be good. You're confident. You have experience. When you work this way, whatever it is that you shoot, what happens is that when you do have that critical wedding, that critical commercial session, that magazine shoot, you're going to have the confidence to know that you can nail it and know you're getting it in camera and that it's going to be even better in post. If you use Pictorialist, definitely download the update. If you don't and you want to check it out, I'll put a link in the description, and I do appreciate the support. But regardless, go put these techniques to work and you're going to see amazing results. Peace out, guys.